The restaurant was the kind of place most people only saw from the outside. Soft lights, quiet music, glass walls that reflected money and comfort. Inside, everything was calm and polished. The air smelled of warm food and fresh bread. Well-dressed guests sat in small groups, speaking in low voices. Every move inside the room felt expensive, slow, an important. At the center of it all was the owner, a wealthy tycoon known across the city. People said he had built his business from nothing. Others said he had crushed many people on his way to the top. Nobody knew the full truth. What everyone did know was this: when he entered a room, people noticed. That night he sat near the large unused piano placed beside the wide glass wall. It had been there for years, more as decoration than anything else. Rarely anyone touched it. The tycoon liked it that way. To him, it was a symbol of class, not something meant for random hands. The restaurant was full. Waiters moved quickly between tables. Plates were served perfectly. Smiles were practiced and polite. Among the staff was a young waitress, quiet, simple uniform, hair tied back neatly. She moved with care, always careful not to make noise. Most guests barely noticed her. To them, she was just another worker passing by with food, but she noticed everything. She noticed which guests were nervous when ordering, which ones argued quietly at their tables, which ones were kind, and which ones looked through her like she did not exist. She had learned long ago to read faces without staring. It made her job easier. And safer. That evening she had already been on her feet for hours, carrying heavy trays, cleaning tables, and smiling through tired eyes. Still, she never complained. Not out loud, at least not as she passed the tycoon's table with a tray of drinks. He looked up at her. "Wait," he said calmly. She stopped at once. "Yes, sir?" Her voice was polite, soft. He studied her for a moment. Not in a cruel way. More with curiosity. Something about her calm face made him interested. "You work here every night?" he asked. "Most evenings," she replied. He glanced at the piano beside him, then back at her. "Do you play?" She looked at the piano too. Just for a second. Then back at him. "No, sir." The tycoon raised an eyebrow slightly. "You answered too fast." She felt her heart beat faster, but kept her face steady. "I meant—" "I don't play here." A small smile appeared on his face. Some guests nearby were listening now. "So you do play," he said. The waitress hesitated. Everyone was suddenly watching. Her hands tightened around the tray. "A little," she finally said. Soft laughter came from a few tables. "A little?" He repeated. "Then why don't we hear it?" She looked around. Dozens of eyes were on her now. Her throat felt dry. This was never supposed to happen. She was just doing her job. "I'm working," she said gently. "So am I," the tycoon replied. "And tonight, I feel like hearing some music." People smiled. The mood felt playful to them. Like a show about to start, he leaned back in his chair. "If you sit at that piano and impress me, I'll give you a bonus big enough to buy your freedom from this job." The guests gasped softly. Some laughed. Some raised their phones. "If you embarrass yourself," he added calmly, "you go back to work like nothing happened." Silence spread through the room. The waitress stood frozen. This was not a joke to her. This was her job. Her pride. Her life balance. She was not rich. Every shift mattered. Every mistake mattered. One wrong moment could cost her everything. "I'm just a waitress," she said quietly. "People come to eat, not to hear me." The tycoon leaned forward. "Then prove me wrong?" A few people chuckled again. The pressure was heavy in the air. In her mind, memories rushed back. A small room. A broken old keyboard. Late nights when everyone was asleep. Fingers shaking with practice. Music played softly so no one would complain. She had never played for a crowd. Never for someone like him. Her eyes drifted back toward the piano. The black surface shined under the soft lights. It looked clean, untouched, almost cold. The tycoon waited. The manager watched nervously from the side. Other workers whispered. Some smiled. Some felt uncomfortable. The waitress felt her chest. Tighten dot, she could walk away, and no one would remember this moment, or she could. Try dot, she slowly set the tray down on a nearby table. The room grew. Quieter, I can't promise anything, she said. I've never played in front of people. He nodded once. Neither had I when I signed my first business deal. That line made a few people laugh again. She took a step forward. Her legs felt heavy. Her hands felt numb. Each step toward the piano felt louder than the music that normally played in the background. Some guests whispered, "This is going to be embarrassing. She looks too nervous. She's just trying to get extra money." Others watched silently. When she reached the piano, she stopped dot up close. It looked even larger than she remembered. The seat was cold when she touched it. The keys were bright white, smooth, untouched by any real hands for a long time. She sat down slowly. For a moment, she only stared at the keys. All sounds seemed to disappear in her ears. She could feel her heartbeat in her fingers. The Tycoon crossed his arms. "Whenever you're ready," he said. She took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment. The room felt heavier than before. All the chatter, all the laughter seemed to vanish. Only the shine of the piano and the expectant eyes around her existed. She closed her eyes for a brief second. A rush of memories hit her nights alone in her small room. The worn keyboard that squeaked under her fingers, the notes she had played softly so no one would hear. She remembered the tiny thrill every time she learned a new song, the long hours when her fingers ached, the pride of creating something beautiful out of silence. She took a slow, deep breath. "Okay," she whispered quietly to herself. Her voice was so soft that only she could hear it. Then she pressed a single key. The note rang clear, simple, pure. It was nothing complicated, but it was honest. The room paused. Some guests leaned forward in their chairs. Some faces showed surprise, curiosity replacing the earlier amusement. A few of the waiters stopped in their tracks. Even the Tycoon tilted his head, watching closely. She began slowly, letting her hands find the rhythm. At first, the melody was soft, uncertain, like a whisper. But then something inside her shifted. Her fingers moved more confidently. Each note blended into the next. It wasn't flashy or overdone. It wasn't meant to impress with speed or strength. It simply flowed, and somehow the music began to fill the room. The crowd stopped laughing. Phones lowered. Conversations died down. People couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. The notes seemed to come from somewhere beyond the piano, carrying emotion that touched every person in the room. The waitress felt herself becoming part of the music. She wasn't nervous anymore. She wasn't worried about what anyone thought. She was only listening to the sound she created, letting it grow. It was like the world around her melted, leaving only the keys beneath her fingers and the sound floating through the air. Some guests' eyes widened. Others leaned closer to hear better. A few held their hands over their mouths, unable to hide their surprise. Even the Tycoon, who had seen everything life could throw at him, felt a chill run down his spine. He wasn't used to being moved like this. Usually he watched people fail, judged their weaknesses, smiled at their mistakes. But this was something different. The music changed slightly. It became richer, deeper, with subtle variations she had never planned. She hadn't written it down or practiced it for anyone. It came from memory, from feelings, from a life that had been quiet, unnoticed until now. Each chord struck with emotion. Each pause held meaning. Every note told a story the words could never capture. A couple of guests whispered to each other, "I thought she couldn't play." One said, "She's incredible," another replied. The waitress felt her heartbeat synchronize with the music. Her hands moved faster now, but still carefully, intentionally. She could feel the tension in the room. She could feel the disbelief slowly turning into awe. Then, just as she reached a familiar part of the melody, she noticed the Tycoon leaning forward slightly. His arms were no longer crossed. His eyes were wide. There was a subtle nod from him, almost imperceptible, but she felt it. She didn't stop. She couldn't. The music demanded to be heard. Some of the guests had stopped trying to record videos. Their phones were forgotten on tables. No one clapped yet. No one dared interrupt. Everyone was listening. For the first time, the restaurant felt like more than just a place to eat. It felt alive. It felt like it had a heartbeat of its own. She looked briefly at the piano keys. They were ordinary, black and white, yet they carried her dreams, her memories, her hope. For years, she had never played for anyone like this. And now she realized that playing for strangers could be just as powerful as playing alone. The melody swelled. She let herself go with the music, adding slight variations she hadn't tried before. Her eyes were closed, but she felt the crowd's energy like a quiet current beneath the notes. They weren't mocking her anymore. They weren't laughing. They were waiting, holding their breath, feeling something they hadn't expected from someone they had underestimated. A few guests were whispering, voices trembling slightly. "Where did she learn that? She's amazing," someone else said, voice barely above a whisper. The Tycoon's expression softened. He had seen many talented people in his life, but there was something rare about this moment. Something pure. Talent alone couldn't explain it. It was passion, hidden behind years of quiet struggle. Finally breaking through, the waitress didn't notice the time passing. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. Her body was tense, yet her hands moved freely. The music grew more confident with every note. She could sense the shift in the room. The earlier amusement had completely disappeared. Now all that existed was attention, respect, and something else she hadn't expected, a deep connection. Her performance was no longer about proving the Tycoon wrong. It wasn't about the bonus he had promised. It wasn't about surviving this one night. It was about sharing a part of herself that had waited too long to be heard. For the first time, she felt the room noticing her, not the uniform. Not the tray she carried, not the job she performed, but her. And it was overwhelming, humbling, frightening, and exhilarating all at once. The music softened again. She played a gentle, lingering chord and let it resonate. The sound hung in the air. A few people gasped quietly. A couple of guests held their hands to their chests. The Tycoon leaned back slightly, a look of disbelief mixed with admiration on his face. She opened her eyes slowly. The room was quiet, not with awkward tension, but with something far more powerful. Everyone had stopped moving. Some faces were wet with quiet emotion. Some smiles were filled with wonder. And the laughter from before? Completely gone, the waitress realized something in that moment. She had never known she could make this much impact with music. She had never seen strangers look at her with such attention, with such respect in her entire life. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a final moment. The energy in the room was electric but silent. Everyone was waiting for the next note, not daring to breathe. The pressure was immense, but she felt ready. She took a deep breath, letting the silence guide her next movement, preparing for the part that would make the room remember this night forever. As the last soft notes of her current melody faded, the waitress closed her eyes again. But this time, she didn't just hear the room around her, she heard her past. It had not been an easy journey. Music had always been her escape, but life had rarely given her the luxury of time or space. She remembered the tiny apartment she had grown up in, where the walls were thin and the neighbors loud. The old keyboard she had learned on had missing keys and sticky pedals, but to her, it was the most magical instrument in the world. Every evening, after everyone else had gone to bed, she would quietly press the keys, listening to the notes echo in the small room. She remembered nights when her stomach was empty, when she went to bed hungry, but her fingers still danced across the keys. She remembered the frustration of wanting to play a complicated piece and failing again and again, until finally, slowly, she learned it. She remembered the tiny victories, the moments when her music finally sounded like she had imagined. That old keyboard had been her teacher, her companion, her secret world. For years, she had hidden her talent. Not because she was afraid, but because life demanded survival first. Money had to be earned, bills had to be paid, and opportunities for music had always seemed far away. She had tried to play at small events once or twice, but nerves and fear of judgment always held her back. It was easier to stay invisible, to serve tables, to smile politely, and to survive, but tonight was different. Something inside her had shifted the moment the Tycoon had challenged her. The small thrill she had once felt alone in her room, the joy of music, the pride in creating something beautiful was now mixed with something new. Courage. She realized she could no longer hide. She could no longer let life dictate that her gift remain unseen. Her fingers moved again, this time with a deeper feeling, as if the piano itself remembered her struggles. Each note carried a story: the quiet nights, the frustration, the hope, the tiny victories. She poured everything she had into the music, letting it flow freely. Without fear or hesitation, the room was completely silent. Guests leaned forward, unable to look away. Their earlier judgments, the whispers, the laughter, all of it vanished. In that moment, the music told the story of a person who had worked quietly, tirelessly, and with passion. It told the story of someone who had been overlooked for years, but who could not be ignored any longer. Some people in the audience felt their hearts tighten. One elderly woman pressed her hand to her chest, tears forming in her eyes as she realized the depth of emotion in the performance. A young man in a suit whispered, "I never expected this," and shook his head in disbelief. The Tycoon's expression was unreadable, but there was a subtle shift in his posture. The challenge had been intended as a joke, a test, but it was clear now that this young waitress was no ordinary performer. She continued playing, letting her past guide her fingers. The melody became richer, more complex. It was as if all her experiences, the hard nights, the moments of doubt, the fleeting joys, and the tiny triumphs had fused into this one piece. She had never performed like this before, and yet it felt natural. It felt right. Memories of her family came to her mind. They had not always supported her music, not because they didn't care, but because life had been hard for them too. They wanted her to focus on practical things: jobs, responsibilities, survival. But they had also given her the one thing she needed most: belief in her own abilities. Her parents, in their quiet way, had always noticed when she practiced secretly, always encouraged her to keep going. Even if they could not understand the depth of her talent, the audience could feel the story behind the notes, even without knowing it. The music spoke louder than words ever could. Some faces softened, some leaned closer, some simply stared, mesmerized. Every note was a piece of her life, and somehow the room could feel it. She had never imagined that anyone outside her family or friends could ever truly hear her story. And yet, here she was, in front of dozens of strangers, laying it all bare. Every ounce of struggle, every moment of quiet determination, every hope and fear, everything was on the piano. The Tycoon, who had expected a simple performance, now leaned forward in his chair, captivated. He had seen many talented people in his life, people who had practiced and polished their skills to perfection. But there was something raw, real, and alive in this music that he had never encountered before. It was not just talent. It was authenticity. It was honesty. It was the life of someone who had fought quietly, worked hard, and refused to give up. As the melody reached its peak, the waitress felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had done this countless times in her small room, but never like this. Never with such intensity, such attention, such impact. It was overwhelming, yet empowering. Every note she played was a declaration. She had lived, she had tried, and she had survived. And now she was seeing. The music softened again, slowing down to a gentle conclusion. She let her hands linger on the keys, feeling the vibrations. The silence that followed was profound. It was not uncomfortable. It was full of awe, respect, and amazement. The audience didn't know what to do at first. They had come expecting entertainment, perhaps a little laughter, but instead, they had witnessed something extraordinary. The waitress opened her eyes slowly. She looked around the room, and for the first time she noticed the faces of those who had doubted her. Some looked shocked. Some looked moved. A few were wiping tears quietly. And the Tycoon, his usual stern expression had softened into one of deep respect. She realized that this moment, this performance, had changed more than just how people saw her. It had changed how she saw herself. For years, she had hidden, questioned her worth, wondered if she could ever make an impact. And now, she knew that her music, her voice, her passion, her story could reach people. It could move them. It could inspire them. Her fingers hovered above the keys one last time. She felt the energy in the room, the silent admiration, the unspoken connection between her and the audience. She took a deep breath, preparing to finish the piece in a way that would leave a lasting impression. The Tycoon leaned back slightly, folding his arms, but there was no doubt in his eyes now. The challenge had been real. The result had been far beyond anything he expected. The waitress pressed the keys again, letting the final notes flow, each one carrying the story of her life, her struggles, her dreams, and her determination. And as the music lingered in the air, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the last note, for the moment when silence would finally fall, and every person there would realize they had just witnessed something truly unforgettable. The final notes hung in the air, soft and trembling, and for a few seconds there was complete silence. No one clapped. No one whispered. The restaurant felt suspended, as if time itself had paused to honor what had just happened. The music had stopped, but the feeling it left behind seemed to linger, pressing gently on every heart in the room. Then, slowly, a hand lifted. Another followed. Soon applause began, first hesitant, then growing stronger. It wasn't polite clapping, it was real. It was the kind of applause that came from awe, from emotion, from the recognition that something rare and beautiful had just been witnessed. Guests stood, some on their chairs, some leaning forward with tears glistening in their eyes. A few couldn't stop smiling, mouths open in disbelief. The kind of disbelief that comes when someone shatters your expectations in the most unexpected way. They had all thought they knew the story. She was just a waitress, quiet, humble, part of the background. But tonight she had rewritten that story entirely. The Tycoon remained seated for a moment, arms still crossed, but the expression on his face had completely changed. The usual sharpness, the critical eye, the air of knowing everything gone. In its place was a rare and genuine admiration. He leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the young woman at the piano. He had challenged her for fun, to test her, perhaps even to laugh at the result. Now he couldn't stop thinking about the depth, the courage, and the talent he had just witnessed. The waitress rose slowly from the piano bench, her hands shaking slightly from the intensity of what she had done. She looked around the room. People weren't staring at her like they had before. They weren't judging her or laughing or talking over her. They were seeing her. Really seeing her? For the first time in a way that mattered, a few guests came closer, their voices trembling with excitement. That was incredible. Where did you learn to play like that? She's amazing. The energy in the room shifted completely. The restaurant that had felt cold, reserved, and rigid just moments ago now felt warm, alive, almost electric. People were no longer eating quietly. They were talking about the performance, about the emotion, about how someone so ordinary could create something so extraordinary. The waiters and staff, who had been watching from the side, exchanged glances. Some whispered quietly to each other, smiles breaking across their faces. They had seen her work tirelessly every night, but they had never imagined that the quiet girl they served and watched so often could move an entire room with music. Even the Tycoon stood now. He straightened, tall and imposing, but there was no edge in his stance. Instead, he looked at her with a respect that rarely touched his features, the kind of respect that is earned, not demanded. He cleared his throat and spoke in a tone that carried through the room. Firm, yet surprisingly gentle. You have talent, he said. Not just talent. Something more. Something rare. You have heart, and that is what makes your music extraordinary. The waitress felt her chest tighten. She had not expected praise from him, not in words that felt so genuine. She had only hoped to survive the moment without embarrassment. Instead, she was being recognized, really recognized, for something she had kept hidden for years. Some guests began to approach her, offering congratulations. Others lingered silent, their eyes filled with wonder. Every face she met seemed to reflect a mix of surprise and admiration. She had never experienced anything like it. She had never imagined that strangers could respond to her music so deeply, so sincerely. The energy in the room was contagious. People who had been reserved and polite were now openly expressing their emotions. Some laughed in amazement. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Some whispered to their companions words of awe and disbelief. The music had broken down walls, and suddenly, everyone was connected in a shared moment of beauty. The Tycoon stepped closer to the piano. He had rarely done something like this, stepping into a moment without control, without expectation of profit or result. But tonight he felt compelled. Compelled to acknowledge the courage it took to rise from a quiet background to stand before strangers, and to pour one's heart into something so personal. "You didn't just play," he said, voice softer now, filled with awe. "You told a story I didn't expect to hear, and yet one I can't forget." The waitress smiled nervously, still catching her breath. She hadn't intended to tell anyone her story tonight. She hadn't expected the crowd to understand her life, her struggles, her quiet nights alone with her music. And yet, somehow, the room had listened. Somehow, the music had carried her history, her emotions, and her hope directly into their hearts. A couple of children at a nearby table clapped eagerly, looking up at their parents as if asking, "Did you hear that? Did you feel that?" The parents nodded, smiling, their eyes reflecting the same sense of wonder that seemed to touch everyone present. The waitress looked at the piano once more. It had been just an instrument, a piece of furniture in the room. Now, it had become a bridge between her past and this moment. A bridge between a quiet life and a world that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. People were still clapping. Some had stood from their seats entirely. Some had tears in their eyes. The atmosphere had shifted from one of casual dining to something far more human, far more alive. It was as if the music had breathed life into the room itself. The Tycoon finally spoke again. "You have something very rare. Don't waste it. Keep playing, keep sharing, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words, simple as they were, carried a weight she hadn't expected. They were not commands, not orders, not empty praise. They were acknowledgement, validation, recognition of years of effort, sacrifice, and perseverance. The waitress nodded, humbled. She felt the energy in the room still pulsing around her. Every face she met told her the same thing. "You matter. You are seen. You are extraordinary." Slowly, she stepped back from the piano, hands trembling but heart full. She had not only survived the moment, she had transformed it. She had taken a room full of strangers and shown them a part of herself, a part they had never expected, a part that would linger in their memory long after they left. And as the applause continued, the smiles, the whispers, the awe spreading like wildfire, she realized something even greater. For the first time, she truly believed in herself. Not because anyone had praised her, not because the Tycoon had acknowledged her talent, but because she had taken a risk, faced her fear, and let her passion shine. And in that moment, the restaurant was no longer just a place to eat. It was a place of transformation, of courage, of human connection. The music had done what words could not. It had reminded everyone present of something important. Greatness can come from anywhere, and courage often speaks louder than status, wealth, or expectation. The applause still echoed in the room, but slowly the guests began to quiet down. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Some leaned back in their chairs, shaking their heads in disbelief. The energy that had been electric moments ago softened into a warm, humbling feeling. People were still staring, but now it was with admiration, respect, and a quiet sense of awe. The waitress took a deep breath, letting the moment settle over her. She had never imagined that one night, one decision could change so much. Just hours ago, she had been serving drinks, taking orders, moving quietly in the background. Now all eyes were on her, not as a worker, not as someone ordinary, but as someone extraordinary. The Tycoon approached her. His steps were deliberate, calm, yet heavy with intention. The room fell into a respectful silence. Even the guests who had just been whispering among themselves turned to watch. The man who had challenged her now looked at her not with doubt but with respect. Real respect. You have a gift, he said, his voice quieter now, but every word deliberate. A rare kind of gift? Most people hide it or don't even realize it exists. You've shown it tonight in a way no one could ignore. She swallowed, unsure how to respond. Words felt small compared to the journey she had lived, the music she had played, and the emotions she had poured into every note. I didn't expect. She began softly, but the words faltered. You don't need to say anything, he interrupted kindly. Actions spoke louder than words. And tonight your music did all the talking. Her chest tightened. His acknowledgement wasn't just about talent. It was about her courage, her persistence, her determination to keep moving forward despite everything life had thrown at her. The long nights of practice, the sacrifices, the doubts, the quiet pain, none of that had been wasted. All of it had led to this moment. He paused, looking around the room briefly before turning back to her. I want to help you. You have potential that shouldn't be hidden. If you're willing, I can provide opportunities for you to learn more, to grow, to perform. Whatever it takes to let your talent flourish. She blinked. The words were almost unreal. For years, she had dreamed of someone noticing her music, but she had never imagined an offer like this. Someone willing to open doors, to invest in her dreams, to believe in her when she herself had sometimes doubted. I don't know what to say, she whispered, emotion catching in her throat. Then don't say anything, he replied gently. Just promise me one thing. Don't let fear or doubt hold you back again. You've seen what you can do. Now take the next step. Her mind raced. So many possibilities. So many paths suddenly open where there had been none. The small apartment she lived in, the long shifts she worked, the quiet life she had accepted, all of it could change. And yet she felt no fear. Only hope and something deeper. Belief. The guests around them started to murmur again. Quietly, this time, sharing their amazement at what had just happened. Some came closer to congratulate her, to shake her hand, to let her know how much she had moved them. A few left small notes of encouragement on the tables. Everyone wanted to hold on to this moment, to honor it, and to recognize the courage it had taken. She realized then that her performance hadn't just changed her life. It had changed the room. The laughter, the doubt, the casual dismissiveness, all gone. In their place were respect, admiration, and a sense of human connection that had come through something as simple, yet profound, as music. The Tycoon nodded once more. You've earned more than applause tonight. You've earned the chance to grow. Don't waste it. She smiled, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. Not tears of fear, not of exhaustion, but of relief, pride, and joy. She had risked everything in that one moment, and now the world seemed larger, brighter, full of possibilities she had once thought impossible. The guests, sensing the significance, stood again. A spontaneous wave of applause filled the room, louder, longer, filled with genuine emotion. It was no longer about a challenge or a show. It was about acknowledging someone who had fought quietly, lived with resilience, and finally stepped into her own light. The waitress looked around, feeling the warmth of their attention, but her eyes kept returning to the piano. The same piano that had been ignored, that had sat in the corner of the restaurant for years, now felt like a bridge to a future she had only dreamed of. It had carried her through her doubts, her struggles, and her quiet perseverance, and it had helped her reach this moment. For the first time, she truly felt that she could pursue her passion, that the music she loved, the talent she had nurtured in secret, could become a part of her life in a way she had never imagined. The Tycoon's offer was more than an opportunity. It was a validation of all the nights she had spent practicing alone, of every tiny victory she had claimed quietly, of every hope she had held on to when life felt impossible. Slowly, she walked away from the piano, feeling a sense of completion and new beginnings at the same time. The room seemed to hum with life, as if acknowledging the change. Guests lingered, reluctant to leave, as if they too had been part of something extraordinary. The Tycoon extended his hand, and she shook it. No words were needed. The connection, the recognition, the promise of the future, all communicated in that simple gesture, and as she stepped toward a new chapter of her life, she realized that one decision, one moment of courage had transformed everything. One night in a quiet restaurant had shown her and everyone who had been watching that greatness could come from anywhere. That determination, passion, and courage could break through doubt and fear. That life could change in an instant if you only dared to take the first step. The applause and whispers continued, fading slowly as the night went on. But in her heart, she carried something far greater than recognition or praise. She carried belief. Belief in herself, her talent, and her future. She had been seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life, and nothing could take that away. From that night on, the restaurant would be remembered not just for its food or its wealthy patrons, but for the moment when a quiet waitress dared to play, and in doing so, changed the lives of everyone in the room, including her own. And as she walked out that night, stepping into a world of possibilities she had once thought unreachable, she smiled quietly to herself, knowing that this was only the beginning.